Welcome, you're watching BR24 live, covering this year's Munich Security Conference. Whole, free and at peace, visions for Ukraine is the panel discussion that is coming up next. Stay with us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please join me in welcoming three foreign ministers to talk about visions for Ukraine, the most important vision of which is peace. Annalena Baerbock, Antony Blinken, and of course, Mr. Kuleba. Wonderful to have you. When we're thinking about Ukraine, I think all of us want to think about a future of Ukraine that is at peace. But how do we get there? And most importantly, once we do get there, how do we ensure that Ukraine remains at peace? Because Russian aggression may return. So I'd like to start with you, Minister Baerbock, and ask you, how do you see the end of the war? What are the steps that you think need to be achieved? And do you see this as potentially a negotiated solution at the end of the day, or can it only be achieved through military victory by the Ukrainians?
Well, in the end, there must be peace. And it has to be just and durable peace. And there's one easy way that this war will end and that we have peace again, and this is Russia stops the bombing and just Russia withdraws its troops. And we can do this tomorrow. If Russia decides to withdraw their own troops tomorrow, then we do have peace again, not only in Ukraine, but peace around the whole world, because we see the negative effects. And I think we have to be aware of 3 points on the path if Russia doesn't take this decision. Russia, and we debated it within the last 2 days here also in Munich, is counting on that at some point we are too exhausted, and we as an international community, and would give in. And meaning that saying stop the fighting and stop the military support from other countries in the world. But what would that mean? Would that mean peace? No, because part of Ukraine, which is now still under the control of Russia, would remain under the control of Russia. And those who are saying, just stop the hostilities right now, and this is automatically peace, this peace would mean that we would give those people of Ukraine towards Russia. And this would also mean that this is the end of the international order and the end of international law. Because this is my second point, and I think the Chancellor and also President Macron made that clear yesterday as well. If at this moment we would say Russia should just take part of Ukraine, then Russia would have won with the method that one aggressor can just conquer another country, and then it would be the end of the Charter of the United Nations. And my third point I would like to make, because also in Germany, I think always around the world people ask, but if you wouldn't have delivered weapons in the beginning, maybe there wouldn't be so much fighting. I think we have to ask the question the opposite way around. If we wouldn't have decided on the 27th of February in German Parliament, or on the 24th around the world to support Ukraine, there wouldn't be 13 million refugees in Ukraine or outside of Ukraine, 1 million in Germany. The total population of Ukraine is 42 million people. If we wouldn't have supported Ukraine since February 27th, then we would have seen Bucha, Mariupol everywhere in the whole country. So those of the people asking around the world, so what were the effects from the sanctions? What were the effects from the international support? The effect was that, unfortunately, we could not bring back peace to Ukraine because Russia still wants to destroy Ukraine. But we could save millions of people's lives, and that was worse every day. And we will save these lives and protect these civilians every single day as long as Russia attacks Ukraine.
Thank you. I want to bring you in, Mr. Blinken. When we talk about peace, are we talking about Russia returning to February lines, or are we talking about post-2014? Because Crimea is an issue that Ukrainians care a lot about, and I'm sure you'd like to come in on this, Minister Kuleba.
Well, first let me say how wonderful it is to be here in Munich again, but especially wonderful to be surrounded by my two good friends and colleagues. Germany has been absolutely extraordinary in its leadership over the last year. The third largest donor to Ukraine in total, taking steps that I think few of us in this room would have imagined possible before the Russian aggression. And that's due to the leadership of the Chancellor, and it's due to the leadership of my friend Annalena Baerbock, who's been extraordinary from day one. We have been shoulder to shoulder from day one. And of course, Dmytro Kuleba has been the voice and the face in many ways of Ukraine around the world, not just with us, but literally around the world, building support on every continent. And his own personal courage and the way he does his work on behalf of his country is extraordinary. So I thought it was important to acknowledge that, as well as all of you. Look, simply put, fundamentally, these are decisions for our Ukrainian friends to make. This is their country, their future, their decision. I am, as usual, in violent agreement with everything that Annalena said. And I think we have to be wary of two things. First, we have to be very wary of this somehow false equivalence, and never lose sight of the fact that there is an aggressor and there is a victim. And the world should not in any way expect of Ukraine things on parallel with what we need to expect of Russia. As Annalena said, if Russia withdraws its troops today, the war is over. Of course, if Ukraine stops fighting today, Ukraine is over. And it's as simple and basic as that. Where this goes, as Annalena said, we will support the decisions of our Ukrainian friends about the future of their country. But I think we all have a profound stake in, as Annalena said, a just and durable peace. And what do we mean by that? Just in that any peace has to be consistent with the principles of the United Nations Charter. It is fundamentally against the interests of every other country around the world to wind up with a result that somehow vindicates the seizure by force of territory, that validates that. Because if we do that, we will open a Pandora's box around the world, and every would-be aggressor will conclude that if Russia got away with it, we can get away with it. And that's not in anyone's interest, because it's a recipe for a world of conflict. What does durable mean? Durable means that wherever this lands, we have to do everything in our power to make sure that Russia won't simply repeat the exercise a year, 5 years later. And among other things, that means making sure that Ukraine has the capacity to deter aggression and, if necessary, to effectively defend against it. So even as we're doing everything we can to provide Ukraine with the assistance it needs now to deal with the Russian aggression, we have to be thinking, and we are, about what the post-war future looks like to ensure that we have security and stability for Ukrainians and security and stability in Europe.
I'd like to come back to, I'm told my mic wasn't working, so I hope everyone can hear me now. I'd like to come back to the durable piece. But Minister Kuleba, what does victory look like for you, and how far are we from victory?
It's the third time I'm invited to answer this question since 7:30 in the morning.
Well, you'll be very well rehearsed then.
So I don't want to bore those who heard my previous answers. But for us, there is a short notion of victory, and that's full restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity. And there is a long victory, which includes compensations for the damage inflicted, accountability for perpetrators of crimes, and most importantly, Russia must change. Because I have no doubts that as we will become members of the EU, of NATO, this is going to happen. But in the end, the only durable peace in the Euro-Atlantic space will become possible after Russia poses no threat to the Euro-Atlantic space. And for that to achieve that, we need Russia to change. There is a long road to this result. But if we keep it as our ultimate objective, if we base our policy and decisions on the premise that this is our goal, durable security in the Euro-Atlantic region, with Ukraine being full part of this Euro-Atlantic region, then it will end when Russia will not be able to pose threat. And everything between now and then, I don't want to sound too tough, but will be a war one way or another.
That brings me to the issue of security guarantees, and I'm going to jump between the future and the present. But I think that President Zelensky has been talking to some allies about security guarantees from NATO, not just for the end of the war, but even from now, because it is important for the morale of troops and also for the morale of a population that's fighting. Do you think that that's a possibility, some kind of security guarantees post-war, but that are communicated and agreed by the time you're all in Vilnius?
Well, the biggest security guarantee has been made already, and this was giving Ukraine, but also to Moldova, the candidate status for the European Union, because the European Union is our life insurance in Europe, and we do not have only in NATO a solidarity clause, we do have that also in the European Union. And underneath this decision, I mean, every step we are taking within this process, this is a process which secures the security of Ukraine also for the future. And as everybody know, NATO has an open door policy. This was true in the past, it's still true. And what we are doing now also with the military support is helping Ukraine immediately every day. But we have a short-term, mid-term and long-term perspective. And this is also nothing new in February 2023. But we have decided and started this process in March, April, May last year, and then at the Bucharest summit together at NATO, where we underlined that the support for self-defense is required now, what we can deliver now, but for example, IRIS-T systems, the next ones, they are coming in the next months, but also in the next years. So every weapon delivery support is already looked at also with the standards we are having ourselves. So I think this guarantee has been given already last year. And this is because we always see the glass half empty, and I mean for Ukraine it's more than half empty. It's totally destroyed because so many people have been killed. But we should never forget what we have achieved together within the last year. Not only we are more united than ever. At the OSCE meeting we have been attending, both of us, there was this question, is the OSCE dead? No, not at all. We are also within the OSCE more united than ever. Countries from Central Asia like Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan are saying we want to work closer with you. We are sending as a European Union now a mission to Armenia because Armenia is saying we trust in you for our further peace. So I think we should never forget this because we need still some breath probably for the next months, and we don't know how long we need it. But we always have to remember for what it's worth, for peace in Ukraine, but for peace on the whole European continent.
Secretary Blinken, how about these security guarantees?
We have demonstrated right now an enduring commitment to Ukraine's security. We've demonstrated that through really unprecedented assistance being provided to Ukraine so that it has in its hands the tools that it needs to defend itself every single day. And as Annalena suggested, this is an enduring commitment because, first, many of the things that we're providing now will also be very beneficial to Ukraine's long-term defense and its deterrent capacity. And at the same time, we're thinking and talking very actively about what we can do, not just in the immediate, but over time, to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position going forward. Again, so that we can prevent a repeat of this Russian aggression, or if, God forbid, that were to happen again, that Ukraine would be in a very strong position to deal with it.
Minister?
Well, technically speaking, of course, the best security guarantees between now and NATO membership are sanctions, weapons, and money. But I think the most important security guarantee that partners can give to Ukraine is to firmly and unconditionally believe in the victory of Ukraine. If this is the founding principle of policy making, everything else will follow. And people here with whom I'm sharing this stage, I know they believe in it. And I know I don't have to preach to them, I don't have to convince, because I know that their policy, the decisions they will be making in Berlin, in Washington, in their respective institutions will be based on the assumption that Ukraine must win. So if you agree with this conceptually, if this is the starting point of your consideration, of your decision making, everything else becomes technical.
But do you have any doubt about that commitment today? You don't have any doubt?
Not among the people present at this stage.
Do you want to tell me who?
No. We are working with them.
Can I say too, I know, and I think I can safely speak for my friend, we have no doubt at all about Ukraine's victory and success. And there's a simple, powerful reason for that. Irrespective of anything else, including the support that we're providing. The biggest single difference is that Ukrainians are fighting for their own country, for their future, for their land. The Russians are not. And that will be the biggest difference maker.
So I'm going to ask you a question that I'm sure you have been asked before, but I would still like to hear your answer. Is there any chance of Ukraine being safe in the long term if Vladimir Putin is still leading Russia?
If he doesn't change by 360 degrees, no.
But everything that happened over the last year, and it's truly remarkable what's happened over the last year, not just in terms of the Ukrainian willingness and capability to fight, but even in Germany, and yet he does not appear to have gotten the message at all.
Well, I didn't say no without this half sentence beforehand, because I believe in humans, and I believe in human beings. And we have changed by 180 degrees, because we decided on February 27th, and this is why I'm always referring to this, that we changed totally our export policy with regard to weapons. Before, also myself, I said, no, we are not living in conflict areas. But this is a good thing about human beings, if you're still a human being and if you still see the suffering, that you can say, either I've made a mistake, and I mean, if you never learn from mistakes, you will never end the phase of being a baby. But also, if you recognize, well, this might have been right in the past, but now the world has changed. And on the 24th of February, at least my world, I think all of our world, has changed totally. And then we reflected and said, if our world has changed, our European peace order has been under attack, which I never had to realize in all my life living in Western Germany and being born there. So when we realized this, that we woke up in another world, we said, obviously, the policies from before won't work anymore with regard to our understanding of weapon delivery. This is why we changed by 180 degrees. And if President Putin And this is why I said it in the beginning. It's in his hand. He can make his own decision. He can decide that he changes his course by 360 degrees tomorrow. The whole world would be happy again. Stop the bombing. It's in his hand. And this is why I also think that we should really differentiate. And I'm really thankful to Tony, and he said that first time in Security Council in September. We always have to differentiate who is the aggressor and who is the victim. And if we start to blame the victim, then the aggressor wins. But we can give the aggressor the chance, and we ask him every single day of the last year, please change your mind. So we asked him again, please change your mind, and if he changes his mind, then we have peace again in Ukraine and in the world. And if he doesn't change his mind, we stand on the side of Ukraine until they have freedom, peace, and liberty again.
Mr. Secretary, is it possible that the step-by-step approach that Ukraine's allies have taken, often for good reason, but this step-by-step approach appears as hesitancy in Moscow, and that it is interpreted in Moscow as, well, help is not really forthcoming, it's not enthusiastic, and therefore I will always have a chance to either divide Ukraine's Western allies or maybe force them to pause. I'm sure he's now thinking there's an election in the US in 2024. Maybe I try to wait it out.
So first, just to follow up quickly on what Annalena said, I think there has to be a day of reckoning for Mr. Putin, because this has been a strategic debacle for him. Going back to 2014, when he first came and seized Crimea and the parts of the Donbass. Ever since then, what we've seen is Putin precipitating everything he said he was trying to prevent. Ukraine is united. Back in 2014, before the Russian aggression, attitudes toward Russia in Ukraine, and Dmytro can confirm this, were largely positive. Desire to join NATO was probably about 25%. After the initial aggression in 2014, that of course flipped, and since the renewed aggression last year, on steroids. For the foreseeable future, Ukrainians will hate their Russian neighbors because of what's done, understandably. And Ukraine's own unity is stronger than ever. Our own unity is stronger than ever. Putin thought he could divide NATO. Of course, we've seen exactly the opposite. In my 30 years of doing this, I've never seen this alliance more united and on the verge of welcoming in 2 new members. That, too, no one was thinking about before Putin engaged in this renewed aggression. But here's the other point that's so important, and I'll come to the question. Look at what has happened, what Putin has done to his own country. We now have, by public accounts, something like 200,000 Russian casualties in Ukraine. Think about that for a minute. In less than a year, we have more than 1 million Russians who have left their country because they do not want to be a part of this war and the direction that the country is being taken in. We have 1,000 or more companies from all of our countries who used to do business in Russia who no longer do, because the reputational cost of that is far too high. And all of Russia's connectivity with so much of the world has been cut off piece by piece as a result of the actions that President Putin has taken. So, to Annalena's point, one would imagine that there will be, and one would hope on his behalf, a time of reckoning to realize that the course that he is on is a strategic failure for him in the most graphic terms possible. So I think we have to look at that. As for what Russia is seeing and what Putin may be concluding, no, I think it's exactly the opposite. I think precisely because he thought, first of all, that they would rapidly erase Ukraine from the map in a matter of days. And of course, that didn't happen because of the extraordinary courage and bravery of Ukrainians, but also because they already had in hand some of the tools that they needed to repel the aggression from Kyiv, move it to the east and the south. But then everything he's seen over the last year is an extraordinary coming together of dozens of countries, and not just in Europe, beyond as well, because countries like Japan recognize the implications that this war has for them and for their interests. Everyone around the world is watching. And he's seen us systematically, time after time, working closely with our Ukrainian colleagues, try to assess what they need and make sure that we could get it to them. But what's so important, and I think all of you know this very well, is we tend to get fixated on individual weapon systems, and that's understandable. One thing or another gets in the news and people start focusing on that. But we all know very well that it's not just the weapon systems. It's the training, because if you can't use it, it doesn't help you much. It's the maintenance, because if it falls apart in a week, it doesn't help you much. And it's making sure that all of these things are being used in a comprehensive way with an actual strategy to be successful. And this is exactly what we've been working on. I think Vladimir Putin sees that very, very clearly.
Minister Kuleba, can you foresee a time when Ukraine is at peace, Russia is withdrawn completely, and you're having discussions, new relations with a Russia that is led by Vladimir Putin?
Well,
I know this is a bit
everything except Vladimir Putin is my retirement plan. That's, I want to end the war, I want to go to the village, to the countryside, live there in peace, raise, see my children, and I don't have to get old for that to happen. I'm ready to do it the moment war is over. As long as Putin is in power, we will be in troubles, because Ukraine is his personal obsession. For various reasons which will require another panel to focus simply on this one issue. I believe that the period between the moment when Putin is gone and the new leader emerges will be the period of opportunity for all of us. But we cannot forecast when it's going to happen. This is, so we really, what we have to do now is just to focus on fighting on the battlefield, fighting in diplomatic arena, because yes, we see an unprecedented unity of one part of the world that stands for principles and rules this world is based on. But we also see other parts of the world. Some are neutral, which means effectively, the support of Russia. Some are calling to seize the supply of weapons to Ukraine, which also means that Russia is going to win. Some are asking questions whether Ukraine will be capable to restore its territorial integrity in full, which is about casting doubts and basically posing a question, what was it all for, if in the end you don't get everything that belongs to you? And those who have this idea of going back to the 2014, so-called 2014 line, or Ukraine abandoning NATO plans, I would like to recall two things. First, in 2014, Ukraine, by the law, was a non-bloc country. We were not pursuing membership in NATO. And still Russia attacked. And second, we had the separation line for 8 years. We were very constructive. We were painfully trying to find diplomatic solution. Did it help us to prevent the war? No, it didn't. So probably that means that the solution is not going back to another separation line and to abandoning some of our choices. The way forward is to believe in your choice, to be smart enough to defend it and to make it happen. I have no doubts that it is going to happen. But what inspires me the most is meeting and talking and working with the people who also have no doubts on this matter.
Let me bring some of the audience in. Young man there.
Thank you very much. I'm Linas Kojala, Director of Eastern Europe Studies Center in Vilnius, Lithuania, and part of Munich Young Leaders. Well, Ukraine is fighting a war for its existence, but Russia also poses existential threat to countries on NATO's eastern flank, the Baltic states, my country, Poland, and others. So before NATO summit comes to Vilnius in the next 5 months or so, what needs to be done to send a clear message that Ukraine is not a gray zone on the map of Europe in terms of security, and that NATO's eastern flank is capable of withstanding the threat that comes from Russia, at least before Ukraine joins NATO? Thank you very much.
Mr. Secretary, and perhaps if you'd like to also add.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much for the question. This actually follows on with what we were talking about earlier about Putin precipitating everything he's trying to prevent. One of the things that he's precipitated is a very strong movement of strength for NATO to the eastern flank. And we have had to take, all of us, necessary precautions precisely because of the fear that Russia would expand its aggression beyond Ukraine. And that's exactly what the alliance has done. And if you look at the decisions taken at the last summits and then the deployment of additional forces, additional capacities to the eastern flank countries, already we are in the business of making sure that all of these countries can feel safe and secure. President Biden's been very, very clear, and he said it repeatedly. We will defend every square inch of NATO territory, and that guarantee means something. Going forward, and we'll have an opportunity in Vilnius to talk about this, one of the things that we'll be looking at is what further steps do we need to take to strengthen the eastern flank, and for that matter, in the south as well. One of the ironies of the situation we're in is that Vladimir Putin seems to believe, erroneously, that NATO has designs on Russia, that we pose a threat to Russia, that we aim to commit some kind of aggression against Russia. That has never been the case. It never will be the case. But because of his actions, NATO has been dramatically reinforced. And again, if you go back to 2014 when this first started with Ukraine, look at the trajectory NATO was on then. Budgets were actually going down. Forces from the United States were coming back. Equipment, tanks, planes were coming back. Ever since 2014, as much as I'd like to think that in some part our engagement and leadership played a role, I have to give credit where credit is due. Vladimir Putin has done more than anyone on earth to strengthen the NATO alliance.
Let me take another question there, yeah.
My name is Katarzyna Pisarska. I'm the chair of the Warsaw Security Forum from Poland. And I have a question to, well, the entire panel, but particularly to Secretary Blinken and Dmytro Kuleba. President Biden is coming to Poland this Monday. And he's expected to have a speech in front of the Polish public. What are your expectations from that speech? How significant? What should we be preparing for? And Dmytro, if you can tell me, because I'm sure that Vladimir Putin is also preparing something for this week of this anniversary, something horrific. Are we prepared also for a week that I think will be symbolic? On the one side, we want to show our full support for Ukraine. We want to show that this year we've been in unity. We want to commemorate also the heroes of Ukraine, but at the same time, we know that we will probably see more attacks this week and probably vicious, heinous attacks. So how do we prepare to that? Thank you.
So, Mr. Secretary, first you're going to give us the scoop on the President's visit, and then perhaps both Minister Kuleba and Mr. Baerbock might want to address the second question. Go ahead.
I think it's safe to say that the President will make a very significant speech in Poland next week. Other than that, I've learned one thing: never get ahead of your boss, so I'll let him speak for himself. But in all seriousness, I think it's safe to say that as well, that he's likely to talk about the road that we've traveled together over the last year, where we are today, and, as I said, our enduring commitment to Ukraine's success, which is all of our success.
I believe the speech of President Biden will be far more significant and consequential than the speech of President Putin. Thank you.
Thank you. Artur Gerasimov, MP, Ukrainian Parliament, European Solidarity Faction. Mr. Blinken, Ms. Baerbock, first of all, thank you very much for supporting our country. Believe me, Ukrainian people and Ukrainian soldiers really value that. Your countries, together with UK, are the biggest supporters of Ukraine right now. And I want to ask you the same question. Earlier today, I asked Prime Minister of Great Britain, which steps, from your point of view, can be done with purpose drastically increase the speed of decision-making while supporting Ukraine and while sanctioning Russia? Thank you.
Well, we can always do better and we can always be faster, and this is what we are trying. But on the other hand, we shouldn't resignate of saying because we haven't been quick enough in the past, we just give in. So we are improving every day, and this is why I related to the last year. The first months were very, very difficult because we took decisions we never took before in our lives. We didn't even discuss it before in our lives. So saying what is wrong or what is right, this was always a balancing thing. And I think the important thing was that we always came back to we have to be united, and our frame is the international law, because we are defending also the international law at this moment. And this counts also to our weapons delivery. This is why, and this is the strength of democracy, we are having debates also about these kind of steps. And then we are asking ourselves, so where can we learn from the past? And we learned many things. We learned, for example, that unfortunately, even though we have all NATO standards, that NATO standards alone doesn't help, that your military has to be compatible with each other. So with the howitzers, we thought we have the same howitzers as the Dutch. And then we realized, yeah, we do have the same howitzers, but unfortunately, they don't function together. So this is like we always have to improve. So now with this decision we took right now with the tanks, we are trying, and this is also what we did here in Munich, trying to form a group of those who can support us Germans, with regard to the Leos, and it's the Leo 2, and the best would be the A6, and you learn many things about these questions because maintenance is crucial. So if we don't think the chain afterwards, and this was our learning from the spring last year, then it doesn't really help. So what can we do to become better? Coming back to your questions, getting together the right group of countries, and this is my appeal to everybody in the room. I think everybody knows who does have the tanks we need now to form together a battalion, and that we set up the supply chains, that we set up the maintenance hub directly at the border in order to help every day to save your people.
And just very quickly to add on, as democracies, we have processes and procedures. Sometimes that can be frustrating, but it's important to stick to them and to learn from them. And we did. And just as Annalena said, we learned a lot from the first months. One of the things that we did now some time ago is our Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, stood up in Germany the so-called Ramstein process to make sure that we were doing a better job of coordinating the supply of military equipment to Ukraine and making sure not only that it was coordinated, but that it was moving faster, that we could identify where we had challenges, but also where we could identify who had what to provide. And that has worked incredibly well. We've done the same thing together when it comes to trying to help Ukraine repair and replace the energy infrastructure that's being destroyed by Russia every single day. With Annalena's leadership, we stood up through the G7, a process to do that. The G7 itself, we met again this morning. It's now under the chairmanship of Japan. It was under Germany's chairmanship last year. We met, I think, a dozen times as foreign ministers last year through the G7. The typical meeting rate usually is about 2 times a year. So this was all a way of making sure that we were working together in real time. And I think that we've done that.
Minister Kuleba, what are the 3 things that you want speeded up right now? Not 7.
Yes, I was going to say 7. Ammunition, artillery, and tanks.
What is the problem with ammunition? Because it does seem that while the debate has been very focused on tanks and now jets, the real big problem right now is ammunition. Why are we here?
Because we thought that we would never have a war again on European soil. I'm sorry that I'm always coming back to this point, but I think it's not us to blame that we believed in peace. It is Russia to blame that he, Putin, and not Russia, every Russian. Yeah, we see also the Russian suffering, that he destroyed peace in Europe. And therefore, we didn't have stockpiles with ammunition for a war like this, because we thought that war would be over in Europe again. But because we cannot wish the world as we want it to be, we are building the world, we are building the future. This is why we are building now new ammunition production lines, for example, in Germany. So we hope to fill these gaps by June, July for the Gepard ammunition. We still need to bridge the time in between. And as you might know, I'm a fan of open words. There are a couple of countries in the world who do have this Gepard ammunition. And again, we are calling on them, please help us to bridge this time, that until we have built this new production line, we could use this ammunition, and making it even in a bigger picture. And I would like to thank all those countries who are in other corners of the world and said in the beginning, this is a European war. You haven't been there when we asked you for help. And this is true. Too often we ignored also other conflicts of the world, but there are so many countries who realized if they would not take a position in this war, then it would only help not Russia, maybe they didn't care if it helps Russia, but it would destroy the Charter of the United Nations. And this is why they took a side, because this old saying of Desmond Tutu, in a case you see justice and injustice, an aggressor and a victim, neutrality is not an option, because then you are standing on the side of the aggressor. And this is a plea we are also giving next week to the world again. Please take a side for peace, a side for Ukraine, a side for the humanitarian international law. And these times, this means also delivering ammunition so Ukraine can defend itself.
Secretary Blinken, would you like to come in on the ammunition question?
Again, I think Annalena has covered it very well, but one of the things that we know is that we've had different types of weapon systems that use different types of ammunition. Ukraine has had in its own inventories a lot of Soviet-era weaponry that uses one type of ammunition. Some of the NATO systems that are being supplied to Ukraine use another type, so that's been a challenge. But exactly as Annalena said, some of the stockpiles were not accounting for this. And at the same time, getting these production lines moving again is not like flipping a light switch. It takes real effort, it takes real time. And quite honestly, those who produce these weapons also want to know that if they're going to start a production line again, that it's not going to be turned off in 6 months. So all of these things factor into it. But I can also tell you that pretty much every single day, we are scouring every corner of the earth for the appropriate ammunition for Ukraine.
There's the gentleman down there. Yes. No, sorry. In the middle. Yes, you who are trying to get the... No. Sorry. Yes.
Too many gentlemen here.
So many gentlemen.
So thank you very much. First of all, I wish you all, specifically the people of Ukraine, an acceptable, respectable, and peaceful solution for your country. We as Afghan, I'm from Afghanistan, we know what the Russian invasion is. And I wish you all the best, specifically the Secretary Blinken and Madam Baerbock. Allow me to take you for a moment out of the subject, Afghanistan. Please don't abandon Afghanistan. We are in a very bad position in the moment, and this is also a big pressure on our neighboring countries and as well as for the European countries. Because if it is continuing like this, you will have 100,000 of refugees again on the border of Europe. Please find some solution acceptable for the Afghan nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Sorry, yes, now, yeah, go ahead, please.
Abdulaziz Sagir from Saudi Arabia. My question to Secretary Blinken. Successfully and correctly, you have been able to mobilize a lot of your alliances in the world to stand on this crisis in support of Ukraine. The Gulf countries have taken a semi-neutral position, and the neutral position means we did not support the aggression. We fought in the UN. We have issued our condemnation for the Russian invasion, but at the same time, they did not decide to cut the relation with Russia or China in that one. Did that harm the U.S. relation toward the Gulf by not standing fully on the position that you want them, and because they have taken this sort of balanced position, although they have contributed, to the humanitarian side, and they have condemned clearly the invasion and using the aggression? Thank you.
As Annalena said, there is no neutral position when it comes to a war of aggression. There is no balance. At the same time, different countries have responded in different ways. They've contributed in different ways. Some have focused on humanitarian contributions. Those are usually important given the suffering of the Ukrainian people. Some have focused on economic contributions. That's also incredibly important given the damage that's being done to the Ukrainian economy by the Russian onslaught. Others have focused on security support, and of course that is vital. Some countries have done things that they don't advertise, but as long as the result is there, that's what matters. So we're constantly engaged with partners around the world who have different perspectives on this, different ways that they can help. And from our perspective, first of all, again, you really can't be neutral. But if there's a way to provide support in any of these areas, that's valuable and it's something that we welcome.
Very good. I think there's a question over there, and then we'll come closer. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Lisa Yasko, member of Ukrainian Parliament, member Foreign Affairs Committee, servant of the People Party. I want to ask you, our panelists, about what would you recommend me, as Ukrainian politician, to tell to Ukrainian people when they ask me how long we need to go through all of this? I know that this is the question that really bothers us, and in the political circles we start talking about different type of weapon. We know what is happening. But still, for me, as Ukrainian politician, it's very hard to keep answering that, yes, this weapon will come in 2, 3, 5 months. Can we give some timeline that will bring more confidence and peace to Ukrainian hearts? Because we understand that we in these shoes already for 1 year, and we need to calculate how much energy we still have and we will have in the future. Thank you.
Minister?
My frank and honest answer is, I don't know. Because we cannot give a promise to the people of Ukraine when this war will end, because we don't know, and it always comes back to the point because it lays in the hand of the Russian president. But what we can promise is that we are trying to do everything to give the people of Ukraine as much as help as you need. And you were asking, so when are the next system coming? I was speaking about ammunition with the Gepard systems. We are now training soldiers with regards to the tanks, so we can do the tanks delivery in the upcoming months together with other partners. We are looking at how we can bridge also the time with the IRIS-T, because, and this is what Tony has mentioned, that we are thinking also so much about air defense to protect infrastructure, because we know that the attack on infrastructure, on electricity, is on the purpose that people will freeze to death or don't have water in wintertime anymore when everything is being frozen because you don't have electricity. So we are talking also to partners for the IRIS-T system, that we get short-range systems to protect the systems better. But the frank answer is I don't know, and I cannot even imagine how you deal with this. As a parliamentarian, as a foreign minister, as a father or as a mother, when I was in Kharkiv and realized what this means, that you have in Kharkiv 45 seconds. And they told me, when we heard the alarm, you just count until 45. And then you see whether the rocket hit you or it didn't hit you. And I had to experience it once when we both were there. But speaking to school children, experience it every day. And this is the reason why they cannot go to school, because they cannot count the whole day to 45. And there are no shelters. Then we totally understand how high the pressure is. And what I realized there is also, and this is why I think all the three of us are so frank and open here also on this panel, because I at least realized there that the war is also not over when the troops are withdrawing from the territory, because the rockets in Kharkiv are coming 40 kilometers away from Russia. And this is why on the second track, next to the weapons delivery, we are trying to work so hard every day to convince other partners, to convince other P5 members of the Security Council that they have a responsibility to ensure the world peace. This is why you're sitting at the Security Council, because you have a veto right, because you're also responsible to ensure the world peace. And this is why we have to work so intensively together that this peace will come to Ukraine, but unfortunately we cannot say when it will be.
Let me just follow this up with, you've talked about the P5, and obviously the P5 has been completely paralyzed in this case. But China has a very important role to play. Have you had recent conversations, maybe even today or yesterday afternoon, with your Chinese counterpart, all three of you, about how China can help?
Well, I think it's very clear that there are things that China cannot and should not do to hinder. And by that we mean providing Russia with military equipment that can further its aggression, or engaging in the systematic evasion of sanctions that are designed to put pressure on Russia to end its aggression. And that's something that President Biden made very clear to President Xi Jinping from almost day one. They had a conversation by video maybe 2 or 3 weeks into the aggression. And we've made clear to our Chinese counterparts ever since that we would view any provision of military assistance or evading sanctions as a very serious problem for us and for many other countries around the world. So it's something we watch very carefully. Of course, China continues to spread Russia's narrative at the UN and in other places. It advances the propaganda. To date, as best we can tell, it is not engaged in the systematic supply of military equipment or sanctions evasion, but it's something that we watch very, very carefully.
Minister?
Yes. We had a meeting. This is a good thing. This is a transparency conference here, so you can...
Yeah, we also want to know whether Secretary Blinken had a meeting.
Well, we had a meeting as well, a couple of meetings.
I've had lots of meetings.
Well, I think why we are also all arguing so much what peace means is because of the role of China. Because obviously we are going next week not only to the General Assembly, we are also going to the Security Council. We have heard, I have heard it also in the meeting, but you can read it also in media, that China said they will present a paper for peace, which is good because we need everybody in the world to be ready to stand up for peace. But the question will be, what kind of peace will this be? And this is why I think all the three of us try to underline that there is a difference if you call on everybody to stop delivering weapons, and we call also on China or everybody in the world to not deliver weapons to Russia. But if there's a request of saying, so we should stop supporting Ukraine, then there's a huge difference, which Antony Blinken made in September in the Security Council, when he was saying, and if I may, I quote you again, if Russia stops fighting, and we hope this is the plea also from China next week when they propose their peace program, call on Russia to stop fighting, because then this war is over. But if Ukraine stops defending itself, and this could be another plea, then Ukraine is over. And we cannot accept this, because then also the Charter of United Nations is over.
And I think Annalena's point, you know, and it's understandable to people around the world who may not follow this day in, day out, who are living with their own challenges. In fact, many challenges that have been exacerbated by Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Things like a ceasefire sound very attractive. Who doesn't want guns to stop firing? Except we have to be incredibly wary of the kind of traps that can be set. It may come to be that Putin decides, because things are going badly for him, that his best bet is to call for an immediate ceasefire, but in effect a frozen conflict that will freeze the existing lines in place. He will never negotiate the territory that he seized, and meanwhile he'll use the time to rest, to refit, to rearm, and to reattack. So we need to be very wary of allowing any kind of situation to develop. One last thing. One of the very powerful things that Annalena has done over the last year is to constantly remind us that what is happening in Ukraine is about real lives. It's not an abstraction. And hearing from the parliamentarian is another reminder of that. And one of the things none of us can allow is we cannot allow this to be normalized. We cannot be anesthetized to what's going on. And that's easy to happen. It's relentless on our TVs, and then it becomes background noise for too many people. But the kind of conduct that the Russian forces are engaged in Ukraine, we can never allow that to be normalized. And when we have children who are being taken from their families and sent to Russia and then adopted by Russians in a program that is deliberately designed to do that and, in its own way, try to erase Ukraine's future, that can't be normalized. So one plea for all of us is to make sure that we don't allow that to happen either.
I'm going to give the last, we have run out of time. I'm just going to give the last 20 seconds to Minister Kuleba to tell us what he wants to see in this Chinese peace plan.
I don't think it makes sense to speak about Chinese peace plan before seeing it. I mean, we all understand where it stands. But whatever happens, whatever kind of plans will appear from different quarters of the world, I think we should all be focused on one thing. Even if we are deadly tired, we cannot allow ourselves to get tired of fighting for freedom. And then you have one plan or another or the third one. It's all secondary because you know what you're fighting for. Thank you.
Thank you to the panelists and also to the audience. And I'm terribly sorry that I couldn't get to all your questions. Let's give the panel a round of applause.
You're watching BR24 live, covering this year's Munich Security Conference. And now, joining us once again is our former correspondent for the United States, Clemens Fernkotte, live on the ground at the Bayerische Hof. Clemens, happy to have you back. So let me ask you, after what we just saw, was Kuleba just polite when he said he had no issues with the two others on stage?
I think it wasn't politeness. What we witnessed just the last 40-45 minutes was a first open discussion about the real questions. The questions of peace, questions of what means victory, and the answers. So when Kuleba was saying, I have no issues with the two on the other people on the stage, Secretary of State Blinken and the German Foreign Minister, Baerbock. That was for sure, but he was also asked, was a very great moderator from the Financial Times. She was asking, so what about all the other partners? And then was Kuleba saying, do you trust them too, to see that basically the main bottom line is believing in victory of Ukraine? And he said, no. And then I was asking, could you mention these countries? Was saying no. I said, no, I don't. But more in a serious part of it, basically, it was one of the very first issues that came up with the question, how long will it take? How long will this war go on? And what will be the reaction of the West? How long will they support? And very articulate was Annalena Baerbock in saying, as long as it takes. We all have known in the meantime this phrase, as long as it takes. But she also added, for example, weapon deliveries, ammunition, which is right now an issue, saying that will take for years if it's necessary. And then was a very good question, what about the security of Ukraine as long as the Russian President Putin is in charge? And this question was posed also to Annalena Baerbock. And she was saying, basically, if he doesn't turn his whole idea and policy 360 degrees and turn it around, her answer is no. As long as Putin is in charge, there's no security for Ukraine. And adding to this was the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba. He was saying there's only peace if Russia changes. If really there's change in Russia and poses no longer a threat to its neighbors, and that's a very tall order.
Regarding what you just said, with as long as it takes, there will be the support. Blinken made a very good remark on that, like that we cannot get it normalized or get used to it, so it becomes sort of a background noise because people are numbing up a bit on that. Is this a problem we can see happening right now?
No, it's not my sense. Getting back a bit about the support, and especially support within the population, I think the Vice President, Kamala Harris, this noon made a very good point. When she was nearly finishing her address and telling about support and also the suffering of the Ukrainian people, she was turning to the audience saying, well, I think you will never know the names of small villages and towns in the United States in which there are always Ukrainian flags because, and this was a connection, the Ukrainians, were fighting for their freedom, and going back for sure, we all know, if you go back in U.S. history, it was exactly the same. So that's basically something which connects Ukraine and the American population. In Europe, it's basically the same. If you ask, is it correctly, and Annalena Baerbock did this afternoon again, to support the victim and not getting cozy or at least doing some kind of compromises with the aggressor, and that is the same answer. So I think it will stick.
So Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs Kuleba said what they need is artillery, ammunition and tanks. He didn't mention jets because they don't need it, because they didn't want to push on those. What happened?
I think the question was posed on him, and this was his short answer. Except membership in NATO, we need, as you mentioned, ammunition, artillery shells, and tanks. The reason why he was not mentioning fighter jets, I assume that in the meantime he got the sense that it's not useful at the moment to push the envelope again and again with this issue, because the United States government was saying, well, I'm not going to see this happen. The same was also the German Bundeskanzler, Olaf Scholz, and also the other NATO members, except, for example, Poland, was saying, well, we could, but we will only do it together with NATO, which means without any okay from the United States, it won't go happen. So this is something which is obvious that he didn't mention this. And for sure, he might have lots of talks, bilateral talks here in Munich, and behind closed doors, probably they will have told him, maybe again and again, I think that will be a completely different ballgame. If you talk here, and there are lots of military people from lots of countries, if you talk with some NATO Air Force generals or so on, they're saying, well, what do you think? And basically they're saying, well, this is a completely different thing, because we have to keep in mind what might be the reaction of Moscow.
The title of this discussion was Whole, Free and at Peace. Is the European approach to reach this the same as the US and as Ukraine's?
Well, I think basically they are on the same page. On the same page means that the reason why the European Union as well as the US government, and you have to also include other NATO partners like Canada, which is unfortunately not very often mentioned, but they are on the same page in terms of if we don't continue to support a long haul, what would be the consequences and would we like these consequences? And the consequences would be that first, and Antony Blinken was repeating this again, you open the box of the Pandora, saying if it's allowed and okay that neighbors can roll in their tanks, grab as much land as they wish and get away with it, other aggressors all over the world, and we might think of some, would say, okay, if this works, I can do it and get away with it too. So this is, if you put it in a more political language, it's about rule of law and a national rule-based order. And every single EU state, as well as every NATO state, and I think lots of other countries around the globe, would sign this kind of agreement.
Thank you so much again for joining us, Clemens Fehrenkotte. We will see each other again tomorrow. But now, coming up next, show of force or just for show, fostering resilience in Europe's northeast. You're watching BR24 Live, and we'll be right back after this. Munich Security Conference. And coming up next on the main stage, show of force or just for show, fostering resilience in Europe's northeast. A panel discussion starting with a scene setting by Boris Pistorius, Germany's Federal Minister of Defense.
East Europe. Before we invite all the panelists onto the floor, I would first and foremost like to invite to the podium the Minister of Defense of Germany, Boris Pistorius, who will address us, and after that we will continue our discussion. Minister, the floor is yours.
Professor Bizaska, thank you very much for your friendly welcome. President Levitz, Prime Minister Støre, Senator Shaheen, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a child of the Cold War. I grew up in Osnabrück in an area where many British soldiers lived with their families. On my way to school, I would often see people in uniform, and I looked up to them with useful admiration. It was a time when West Germany was part of NATO's eastern flank. There was an underlying threat that we were always aware of at home. The sight of tanks at Checkpoint Charlie and the Cuban Missile Crisis had become etched on my parents' memory, as would years later the threat of SS-20 missiles threatening Western Europe. Like many households in Germany, we stockpiled tinned food and other supplies for a war emergency. At that time, the NATO alliance secured its eastern flank in my country, in Germany. The uniforms I saw on my way to school were a concrete sign of alliance solidarity. Our allies, whether the United States, France, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Belgium, or Canada, has made Germany's security their own security. I was and I am very grateful for that, and that is why for me it is only natural that in Germany we show the same solidarity today. The security of the Baltics and Poland, and that of all our allies, is also German security. Many things today are different from the Cold War era, but sadly, we are again facing a massive threat to our freedom and security. Russia is waging a brutal war of aggression and conquest against Ukraine. And if Putin had his way, this would only be the beginning. Russia must not and will not succeed with its imperialism and its contempt for international law and the international peace architecture. And because neither diplomacy nor tough economic sanctions have made Putin change course, our show of force is the right response. Show of force, that means, on the one hand, to strengthen the brave self-defense of the Ukrainian people. I am proud to be able to say Germany is among the leading supporters of Ukraine. I visited Kyiv only last week. I spoke with frontline soldiers who were getting ready to their training on the Leopard tanks in Germany. Their faces showed the horror of war. At the same time, I saw their morale is unbroken. Their dedication and courage is impressive. I assured President Zelensky, Germany will help Ukraine for as long as it takes, together with our European and transatlantic allies. And I made clear, Ukraine must win the war. Show of force, this means, on the other hand, that we must strengthen NATO eastern flank, we must strengthen ourselves. When Russia attacked Ukraine, the alliance reacted quickly and with determination, making available 32,000 ground troops, 140 ships and 135 aircraft at short notice. This is real and serious deterrence. We can and we will defend every inch of alliance territory. Together we continue to increase our military presence along the entire eastern flank. In addition, 300,000 troops will be placed on heightened alert to serve as a rapid response force. Ladies and gentlemen, be it during the Cold War or today, be it in former West Germany or just recently in the Baltics or in Poland, the United States of America have always guaranteed European security. And I am deeply grateful to the American people and President Biden for their commitment to transatlantic solidarity in words and in deeds. At the same time, Europe must do more, a lot of more. To me, the formula cannot be NATO or the European Union. It has to be NATO and the EU, or more precisely, a stronger Europe for a stronger NATO. This is why we want Finland and Sweden to join NATO soon. In the interest of the security of our Finnish and Swedish friends, but also in the interest of a strong alliance. Germany is working to strengthen the European pillar with NATO and enhance the EU's military capacities and capabilities. For Europe, it is all about translating our common responsibility into common strengths through more integrated defense efforts, through military mobility, logistics and infrastructure to help us manage future troop deployments from the west to the east, through common armament and procurement projects such as, for example, the European Sky Shield initiative proposed by Germany. This includes, and I'm saying this deliberately with regard to my own country, this includes a policy for arms exports that facilitates cooperation in this field. Today, the German armed forces are crucial for the defense of Europe. Germany is the largest European troop contributor at the eastern flank of NATO. We have a leading role in providing military support to Lithuania. In Poland and Slovakia, we have developed Patriot air defense systems. We are frequently participating in air policing in the Baltics, and we will upgrade our activities by having the Franco-German brigade exercise in Lithuania and Romania. And Germany stands ready to take on more responsibility. To us, national defense equals collective defense. Of course, this comes with a price. We have passed the largest funding package in the history of the Bundeswehr, 100 billion euro for the exclusive use of our armed forces. We will meet the NATO capability goals, and by 2025 we will put at NATO's disposal a full army division. This is our contribution as a framework nation open to other nations and their contributions. We are strongly committed to the 2% pledge, ladies and gentlemen. As you all know, we still have a way to go to get there. I promise I will be working hard to make sure we finally achieve this overdue target. We will be a strong military partner cooperating with and supporting its allies. This applies not only to collective defense, but also to international crisis management, not only on the eastern flank, but also in other regions where security and stability are at stake, including, for example, the Indo-Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, many Germans know very well what it feels like to be the eastern flank. Many Germans know what it is like to live under a dictatorial regime. And many Germans are incredibly grateful for the military support the country and its people have received throughout the Cold War. I hope that German uniforms in Rukla, Sliac or Zamość are nowadays as welcome as British uniforms were in those days when I was a schoolboy in Osnabrück. And may they help protect freedom and democracy in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please join us. Thank you very much. And as we start the panel, I would like to also welcome our other panelists with us, President Eglis Levits, who is the President of the Republic of Latvia. We also welcome Jonas Gahr, the Prime Minister of Norway, and last but not least, Jeanine Shaheen, Senator and the Chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Europe and on Regional Security. Welcome to all of you. We have about 35 minutes to keep this discussion rolling, and of course there's a number of questions I would like to ask and address to the Minister, but before we do, let's try to set the stage also from a broader perspective when it comes to fostering resilience in North and East Europe. I'll start with President Levits. President Levits, a year ago, just after the Russian invasion started, you have expressed concerns, as many of your colleagues in the region, including in Warsaw, that if Putin is not stopped in Ukraine, he will not only reach our borders, but potentially even cross our borders. A year on, after seeing the unprecedented, I think, transatlantic unity and what we have brought from Madrid and what we are hoping to see in Vilnius for the NATO summit, what do you think is the security situation currently in our region? And what do you think is in Putin's head? Because you are a very good expert on Russia and on Vladimir Putin himself. So where do you think he stands today?
So, first of all, I would like to say that this war is an ideological war. Putin has revived the old imperialistic, colonialistic, and racist ideology of the 19th century. In the 19th century, it was usually to try to invade other countries, other continents, and so on. In the 21st century, it's strange. But we have this old ideology, we have a revival of this. The European colonial powers renounced this ideology in the middle of the 20th century without specific difficulties. But we see that for Russia, it is very difficult to renounce this ideology, and there is still a revival. And therefore, I would like to say that Russia is an aggressive country depends not only from Putin, also a big part, we don't know how big part, but a big part of society is supporting this ideology. And therefore, we should count for a long time that Russia will remain an aggressive state. It is possible to denounce this ideology, but it takes time, and it deserves collective efforts. And in Germany, in German, there is a word for that, Vergangenheitsbewältigung. And till there would be a real Vergangenheitsbewältigung, coping with the past in Russia, where all that what Russia has done now in Ukraine and previous in other countries would be reflected and renounced, condemned, that will take time. And we have reacted, I mean the West, NATO, European Union, the West as a whole. By the West, I think I can include also some countries like Japan, like South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. We have reacted very quickly to the new situation, and the decisions of the NATO summit to strengthen the eastern flank of NATO came timely. And now it is to implement. We have already started to implement. 4 new battle groups were established in the eastern flank countries. The presence of NATO troops in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia increased already to in the next future to brigade size. And I think this is the right answer to the current security situation, which is created by Russia, not by us. We have only reacted, but quickly reacted, and we have reacted realistic. So a side effect of this situation, I will also mention, is that some in the West have lost their illusions about Russia, about the possibility through trade to get the change, the regime, or to promote democracy, Handel durch Wandel. I think we can let aside this. The real, only realistic concept is deterrence through credible defense capacities. And we are building these credible defense capacities in eastern flank especially, but also in the whole NATO. Because, as you rightly said, the national defense is collective defense. And together, all the 30 and soon 32 countries of NATO are much more stronger than Russia. And this is the basis for our security in Europe, in the North Atlantic area.
So in the run-up to the Vilnius summit, the NATO Vilnius summit, is there anything more that you expect that would make Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland feel safer? Or are we on the right track?
We are on the right track, but we should implement now the decisions of the Madrid summit, and we are on the way to implement them. We have decided to increase the presence of NATO troops in the Baltic countries to the brigade size. We are doing so, and also by prepositioning of weapons, but also we are expecting that there would be a real size, brigade size which are deployed in the Baltic states in the next future. We are working on that, and this is a message for Moscow, for Putin, or for Russia, that NATO is strong, that NATO is willing to defend the territory of NATO, and this is the basis for the peace, because Russia will know if Russia would attack a NATO territory, then Russia will lose. That would be catastrophic for Russia. And therefore, this is the reason why this ideology, which is in principle aggressive, could not succeed and would not succeed.
Thank you very much, President. Prime Minister Støre, you are a man of dialogue. You have over and over again throughout your years as Minister of Foreign Affairs and of course later as Prime Minister promoted dialogue across the world. You've also worked very closely with the Russian Federation in, for example, the demarcation of your borders. And you've said multiple times that there is a security toolbox, a toolbox for security dialogue here in Europe that does not force Russia to use military options, that dialogue is still possible. A year into the war, do you think that dialogue is still possible? And does that toolbox still exist? Many of us wonder whether the OSCE is still a valuable tool for this type of dialogue. Today we speak mainly about NATO as the organization that protects us, provides us with defense. But what about this dialogue?
Well, I'm faced by a full-fledged attack war. There's only one response, and that is a very strong message, military response. We will defend ourselves. We will support Ukraine in defending itself. It is their right to defend themselves. It's our right to defend them. Mm-hmm. So Norway has consistently, from the beginning, been supporting Ukraine's struggle. We have just announced a 5-year pledge to Ukraine. We are going to support them by 7.5 billion euros over the next 5 years, military, civilian, humanitarian aid. So that's response to that kind of behavior. The great tragedy of this war is that Europe should have had the toolbox to deal politically with differences. That is Putin's great sin, in a way, that he went to full-fledged mobilization and war. in a situation where, well, differences may occur and you deal with them using that toolbox. Now, as I said, you said correctly, from the first year I was Foreign Minister from 2005, and at the moment we had to deal with the fact that we had 170,000 square kilometers in the Barents Sea and Arctic Sea that were disputed with Russia. And according to the law of the sea, then you have to sit down and find how do you define that border. So we worked on that pretty intensively, and that was a time when you could work on it. So we negotiated the limitation, 50-50 division, and a delimitation line which was drawn according to modern principles of law of the sea. I take it that would have been almost impossible today under the circumstances. So I think the point is we have to look ahead to a Europe where countries small and big can be safe. There's no question that NATO is the pillar of this defense. It has been for us since 1949. It is, as the Minister said, collective security across the Atlantic. And NATO, I think, is of extraordinary relevance for both the United States and Canada and Europe. And we have to deepen that cooperation. And then we have to lift our eyes and envisage what will Europe's security order look like in the future. Because there will be a future one day where we have to sit down again and say, how can countries small and big be safe and secure in Europe? And what is happening now, which I think is a fascinating change with the Swedish and Finnish application for membership, all of a sudden the geopolitical setting in Northeast Europe is somewhat changing. Because now the Barents Sea, Norwegian Sea and the Baltic Sea are united in one concept. And the territory can now start to plan for interoperability. I will be in Stockholm on Wednesday with the Finnish President and Swedish Prime Minister to discuss what does this mean for Northern Scandinavia in terms of coordination. We are doing now, German minister has just signed with my foreign defense minister an MOU on how we do military equipment and development. We are buying the same submarines. We have ordered the new Leopard tanks from Germany. So we can start to look at the consistency of an alliance which is there to provide security for all member states. We are also bordering Russia, but we have a different experience than Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania. And that's the great thing about NATO. That is that we can pool our experience, our resources to provide collective security.
Is there any area of resilience that you are particularly maybe worried about when it comes to Russia and Norway? Because you are in a bit better, as you say, position than some of other neighbors, NATO member states. But well, you know, how well is Norway prepared to withstand different types of, from hybrid attacks to even a potential war?
Well, I think this is a very important issue to be discussed in our democracies. What is resilience really? It's a very broad concept because it's obviously about defense, about hard capabilities, and we have to provide them. They have to be relevant. But we see in Ukraine today that resilience is more than only weapons. It's about the mentality. It's about values. And when I visit Ukrainian troops and when I visit Ukrainian civilians, I see, that there is a will there, something which binds them together and something which has united them tremendously during this year, all against Putin's odds. So when we have in Norway now 2 big commissions working, one on pure defense issues, but also on what we call total defense. And that is, looking into how resilient is society in our civilian spheres. Are our companies aware of what threats we may be faced with from hybrid warfare, from intelligence operations, from cyber attacks? Are we sufficiently provided with civilian reserves to withstand the pressure that you see now in Ukraine? So resilience is a broad notion. Norway, we don't see that there is a specific, at the time, military threat against our country. We are next to Russia's nuclear arsenal in the north. A lot of the ground forces Russia has in the north have been removed and sent to Ukraine. And many of those forces will not come back because they have been eliminated in Ukraine. But still, we are under the pressure, you may say, from that intelligence, from the hybrid, from the covert operations. And we have to be prepared in all sectors to face that.
Absolutely, and I have to say I participated in many exercises, policy games, where Svalbard was theoretically attacked by the Russians, so that is also somewhere in the military consideration, but I know it's
But
not.
I'll tell you on that note, you know, northern Norway is an area for superb winter exercises. And part of our resilience is that our allies and partners from continental Europe come and join us in exercising under those winter conditions. That's part of that NATO solidarity, which I think is giving us security.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Minister, first of all, thank you for a great address. We heard for as long as it takes, and we must win this war. It's not enough for Ukraine not to lose this war. We have to win this war. But also, what would you tell today the Ukrainians who say we can't have as long as it takes? This has to end as soon as possible, because also Ukraine and the Ukrainian people cannot go forever fighting this war and dying on behalf of us, on behalf of democracies. What would you say to the Ukrainians today?
That I fully agree. There can't be any doubt about that.
So what are we going to do?
Yeah, we Germany, for only Germany alone, can't do a lot. We can do a lot for ourselves, but we have to do it collectively, with the NATO, with our allies, and with everybody who is able to help and to support Ukraine. But still, it's a way to go. We don't know how long it takes. Well, what we have to do is to support Ukraine, as I mentioned in my short speech, as much as it's possible, as long as it takes. But we don't know how long it will take. And therefore, we have to improve and to achieve, especially in context with our defense industries, to improve the production capacities. We need to discuss what we can do for joint procurement, for example, or standardization of ammunition, order procurement of ammunition as soon as possible and as fast as possible. And at the same time, and that is the dilemma and the challenge at the same time, we have to assure that we will be able to refill our obligations in the NATO and towards our allies, that we are always able to defeat enemies and to defend Europe and NATO territory. This is the dilemma at the same time. As quickly as our stocks are emptying, we can't refill in the same time or in a equivalent time. So this is our dilemma at the moment, and therefore we have to do both in a balance and very mindful.
You've said also about your absolute personal commitment to the 2% GDP spending that is required from all NATO member states. And you've also announced some time ago that you would like to raise the budget, if I understand, from 50 billion to 60 billion, 10 billion rise in the next year, if that's correct. Do you have support in the Chancellery? Because I know you have support in the Parliament for that decision.
Well, my position is the Defense Minister of Germany, and I have to announce very clear what is necessary for our obligations regarding the Bundeswehr and, of course, the NATO. This is my responsibility, and I have to clearly say what is necessary. The second step is to negotiate with our partners in the coalition, negotiating with the Parliament, with my friends from all the parties in the Parliament. This is a hard discussion, maybe, but...
Are you optimistic about these negotiations? Are you optimistic about these negotiations?
I am always optimistic. You look at my face. I'm always optimistic because we experienced during the last months a 180 degrees turn in the opinions of Germans regarding military questions, military issues, NATO, and of course what's going on in Ukraine. People changed their mind. They changed their perspectives. I would never have expected that would be possible in Germany. And from my point of view, it's in the same moment. It's a bit sad, as I tried to say in my speech, that in my age of 62, I am forced to spend billions of money for weapons after having grown up and lived in a time in which we all thought and believed we would never face again war in Europe. This is incredible. This is horrible. But still, people are learning it. at the moment, and very quickly, much faster than I expected.
Thank you very much, Minister. Senator, we've heard today from Vice President Harris about the ironclad commitment of the United States to NATO Article 5. We have seen, an unprecedented visit of a number of senators, congressmen here in Munich. We're also expecting President Biden, as I said, in Poland this week. So I think all this shows the incredible support for NATO, for the eastern flank of NATO, for our region as a whole. But at the same time, today in the morning, a question was asked to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China about Taiwan. Whether he can, I think Professor Ischinger asked that question, whether he can promise that China will not attack Taiwan. And we heard back that Taiwan is part of China. So there was not only no promise, but I think, many people said here, we're preparing for another war. Do you imagine a situation, I'm sorry to asking these hard questions, in which we would have to have our attention in two different places, on the Pacific and here in Central and Eastern Europe, with two conflicts at the same time? Is America prepared for this? Is the transatlantic alliance prepared for such a worst-case scenario? And what did that mean also for the resilience of our region, where America's attention would have to be pulled back into the Pacific?
Well, can everybody hear? I know there's a little echo. That's why winning the war in Ukraine is so important. Because you can bet that China, Iran, North Korea, all of our adversaries are watching what happens in Ukraine. And they're looking to see if the West can stay united, if we can continue to support NATO, if we can continue to support Ukraine. And they're going to make a calculation about what comes next based on the outcome of this war. And so that's another reason why what everyone here has said is so important, and why strengthening NATO in the eastern flank is so important, and why looking at some of the other areas that NATO is weighing into are important. So NATO's work around cyber is very important. As I talk to countries in Eastern Europe and Southern Europe, they're very worried about cyber attacks. And you know that in the Baltics, Mr. President. We saw Estonia was the first country to be subject to a major cyber attack by Russia. We also saw in the Madrid summit, where we had 4 Asian countries that attended the summit, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea. The expansion of NATO to engage Asian countries in the conversation is really important, because what we're seeing in this war in Ukraine is that it doesn't just affect Europe, the United States, it affects the entire world. And to the extent that the shipping lanes in Ukraine have closed down so that food is not available to Africa, that Russia's cut off its energy to Europe and to the United States and other countries, that affects energy around the world. We are all connected, and we need to start behaving, as everyone here has said, like we're all connected and like we all have something at stake here.
Thank you very much, Senator, for this. Let me also thank you for the really incredible bipartisan support that the effort to help Ukraine has fostered in the Congress since day one. I think you were way ahead of the administration in terms of, saying we need to do everything that is possible in the first days and weeks of this war. But how confident are you that this bipartisanship will prevail beyond 2023 and even more so 2024 if necessary?
I think it will continue as long as we need to support the war effort. Senator Risch, who is the vice chair, the ranking member of our Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who is a Republican, and I led a delegation last fall. And we got this question a lot. And I thought he did a very good job of answering it. He said, Congress is a very wide range, represents a wide range of the public in the United States. And so we may have a few people on either extreme, as we have some people on either extreme in the country who don't support this war. But the majority of Republicans and Democrats, Senate and House, are going to do everything we can to ensure that Ukraine has what it needs to win this war.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator. And because we are really left with 10 to 15 minutes, I would like to take a few questions from the floor. Our first question is actually going to be asked by one of our Munich young leaders, Ms. Agnieszka Ignaciuk, who is the chief expert at the Department of the Committee for EU Affairs at the Chancellery of the Prime Minister of Poland. Pani Agnieszka, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much. It has been very interesting discussions. The things that have been said, of course, as you all said, our distinguished speakers, the concept of resilience is vast, and we could have spent probably 2 or 3 more hours discussing what does it really mean. But one particular thing that I would like to follow up on is a point that has been made by the Latvia's president. So already in 2016, during the Warsaw Summit, allies have agreed that resilience is really the prerequisite for a robust deterrence and defense posture. And since then, in Madrid last year, it has been reiterated that resilience is actually a national responsibility, but also at the same time a collective commitment. So with this whole vast concept, if there was one thing that you would have to narrow it down to in order to make sure that we would foster this deterrence by punishment in the northeastern region, northeastern flank, what would it be? If you had to choose one critical measure, activity, area where we should foster our resilience.
Who wants to start? President, would you like to say what is truly important today for Latvia's ability to withstand the type of challenges we're going to see for our security?
Resilience is a very broad notion, as the Prime Minister said. And if you are speaking about societal resilience, then of course commitment of the society to our values. I think this is a basis. And all other things, politics and law and so on, and also our defense, commitment to defense, derives from our values. If our values are democracy, freedom, then of course all other directions of the politics follows. And if I am allowed only to choose one thing, then I would choose value.
Values, very important, President. So that we remain committed to our values, everything that follows. Prime Minister, do you agree? And any other areas?
Yeah, I think I can agree. I mean, so if I had only 5 seconds, I would, of course, agree with values. I mean, we can have a long discussion on that. I would still add another element when it comes to understanding the effects of one year of war in Ukraine. Have a good dialogue with our military and say, what lessons have we learned? What have we learned in terms of Russia's ability and lack of ability? What have we learned of the quality of our weapons and the lack of quality of our weapons? I mean, I take back one important lesson, and that is to defend yourself from long-range missiles. Defend your troops, defend your cities, defend your water, electricity, utilities. So, you know, there are lessons to be learned here. I think the minister mentioned one point, which is how do we get our military, our defense industry to work at a speed and scope which is adapted to our times. You know, when I was foreign minister, I was granting export licenses for military equipment out of Norway. But as Prime Minister, I have seen the effect of these weapons on the European scene. For example, NASAM's air defense, what that means. what does it mean to have operational long-term artillery. But when it comes to replenishing the needs and the stockpiles, we have a challenge. And we really have to get our gear going. So I would agree with values. I would talk about the youth. I would say that young people, where do they get their opinions shaped? And who is feeding their iPhones with ideas? And how can we match the key ideas of democracy, solidarity, what it means to be a community, against the enormous influx of information that shape young people's values? But also on the resilience, on the hard material side, I think we have lessons to learn.
Yes, I'm sorry. Senator, what you wanted to add to this, please.
Yes, I would add accountability to that because, as our Vice President said this morning, people who commit crimes against humanity have to be held accountable. And if dictators think they can do what Vladimir Putin is doing in Ukraine with no accountability, then they're going to be willing to do it again and again and again. So I think we really need to look at how we hold people accountable for atrocities that they're committing.
Thank you very much. Yes, Minister.
You're on.
I think it's working now.
Does it work?
Yeah.
Okay. The Social Democratic Party has...
No, it's not.
I don't think it's on.
I think we'll need somebody from the technical team to help us.
Yeah. This
the mic is coming.
Green light is not on.
Thank you.
Social Democratic Party has a chairman in the early 50s. His name was Kurt Schumacher. And he used to say, politics has always to start with a realistic look at the reality. And I think this is true. And this is a very strong and very important base skill to be able to become and to stay resilient. Because if you dream, if you think the world is another than the one I want to live in, then you will fail in operating what is necessary to do. And I believe that awareness, an optimistic but realistic look into the world, is the best thing for especially for the young generation to see how she can manage and organize and operate the future with friends and allies, and especially towards our enemies. So to be aware, to be awake, to know what is going to do, and then to stand together with the values we just mentioned. This is the best start condition we can wish.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you so much. We have really a few minutes left, and I'll just take two more questions. The lady in the back, and then Rodrish we have here in the front. So we'll take them together, and this is going to also be a final segment. Please.
Thank you so much. I'm Marina Henke from the Hertie School in Berlin. I have a question to everybody but the German Defense Minister. Are you happy with German policy toward Eastern and Northern Europe? And if there was one wish you could voice toward Germany, what would it be?
Thank you for that question. Rodrish, you have the same? Maybe you have a question to your minister.
Well, I have a question to... What is it?
Another mic is coming.
Thank you very much indeed. I could align with the speaker just now. The name of the panel is Show of Force or Just for Show. It is also a show of justice for Ukraine. And therefore I applaud the German Defense Minister for his clear statement that Ukraine must win. Mr. Minister, this is a change in the German attitude, and I'm grateful for that. But what does it mean? And second, to the others, what does this mean for Russia? I believe Russia must learn to lose, but what does this mean Ukraine has to win for Russia? Thank you.
So the last segment is about Germany. Who wants to start? President, please.
Yes. Whether I'm happy with Germany? Yes, I'm happy with Germany. Because Germany has, after period of reflection of the 70 years of Pacific meanings. And quick, very quick, I would say, from historical point of view, in few months changed the situation and came to a realistic approach to reality, as Kurt Schumacher said in the 50s. And I think we can only be happy with this change, radical change. The speech of Chancellor Scholz 3 or 4 days after the beginning of the Russian attack was has already said what will be the German politics, but then, of course, the real politics followed a little bit later, so after several months. So, and I think then we are in line with the whole NATO alliance, Germany and all 29 other members, plus the 2 new members. We have reached a consensus that Ukraine should win, what you said today. And of course, Ukraine will win after our statement here. So, and yeah.
I'm sorry, please continue.
Yeah, no, concerning Germany. So what that means for Russia? For Russia, that means to go back to own borders. It's so simple. To Russian borders, to go back to Russian borders. It's very simple. Of course, there could be certain explanations from Russian side, but without that, there would not be a lasting peace. And thus, lasting peace can be based only on justice. And a peace which would be unjust for Ukrainians, of course, is not a lasting peace. I would also remember that in Latvia, in Estonia, Lithuania, in Western Ukraine, 10 years after the Second World War, during the Soviet occupation, there was a very strong resistance against Russian occupants. And I cannot imagine that there would not be resistance in occupied territories. So lasting peace could be based only on justice, and justice means Russia should go back to their own internationally recognized borders. There is no problem for Russia for that.
Thank you very much, President. Prime Minister, very briefly, Germany, are you satisfied?
Yeah,
and of course, the Russian question. What happens next?
Well, my answer is yes. And I think the great thing about NATO is that we have 30 countries with different positions, histories, backgrounds. We come together and we pool these experiences and we become stronger together. Being a neighbor with Russia has some different historic meaning. Being Latvia and being Norway, we have different experiences. We come together and support each other. We are with Germany and Lithuania working together. If I'm a Prime Minister of Norway, I have to understand what does it mean to be Chancellor of Germany? What history do you bring with you? What presence do you bring with you? And what future lies ahead? How do you play those cards in a way that can maximize what we shall do together? And I believe that Germany has been fortunate to have had wise chancellors who've been able to strike this balance, which only the Chancellor can do. And I'm happy to note that being as a Norwegian, we have extended our defense cooperation with Germany significantly in recent times. That is based not only on trading material militarily, but it's also on this foundation of common values, on working together and having a perspective. So I think what the Chancellor did a few days after the occupation is of historic proportions. And, I depend on succeeding that the minister helps me succeed. And I know that for Germany to succeed, Germany counts on European partners to succeed, and across the Atlantic. So yes, I think this conference has also confirmed that Germany and we are on the right track, but it will require tremendous effort every day from all of us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we'll go back to you, Minister, at the end. Senator.
Yes, I think we're very happy with Germany's commitment to and partnership on this support for the war in Ukraine. And I am reassured, Mr. Minister, by your commitment to the 2% of GDP for defense spending, the commitment to NATO. On Russia, absolutely we need to go back to the 1991 borders. And more importantly, we also need to think long-term about how we deal with Putin and with other dictators. And that's why the strength of NATO, why the deterrence that we're talking about is so important.
Thank you very much, Senator. Minister, if it was up to this panel, you already have the 10 billion in your budget, in your defense budget. However, we wish you much luck with that. If you could address the last question we had, what does it concretely mean, the support that Ukraine needs in terms of course, ammunition, in terms of tanks, but also fighter jets. Where is the red line for Germany, or is there any?
Well, I'm not a friend, to be frankly, to define publicly red lines. This is always a strategic disadvantage. We will see how it is going on, and then we can define internally, was it a red line or was it not? Because otherwise I really do provoke others to do what they want to do to provoke us. So let's stay calm, keep cool, and estimate the things how they really are. And I fully agree with my predecessor concerning the definition of what does it mean winning the war. But the even more important question is, from my point of view, from my perspective, how do we get there? What is the way to go there? Because an everlasting war with huge efforts of munition and weapons and loss of human beings can't be what we really want during the next years. So there must be an exit strategy to achieve what we just said. Ukraine must win the war, but therefore we need a position of strength, a position which is clear towards Russia. And of course we need a plan for afterwards, what is going on afterwards, after the war, in the case Ukraine won the war. How do we deal with a Russia with whom as president? Putin, as a successor? What is happening to the Russian Federation? What does that mean? What does it have as an impact of the situation of peace and coexistence in Germany and Europe? And those are the questions I'm really concerned of afterwards. But this is a discussion we have to lead, maybe behind closed doors and very calmly too. But we have to think about it while we do everything to support Ukraine.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Minister. Our time is up, unfortunately. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for being with us. And let's give a great round of applause to our panel today.
Well, and that's all, folks, for today. Thanks for watching BR24 Live. We will be back tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. with the third and final day of this year's Munich Security Conference. Good afternoon and take good care.